I want to talk to the people of color in the room. Is that okay? I want to talk to the people of color in the room. It's really easy when a conference is predominantly white to assume that there's only whiteness in the room. But people of color are people and also have an evolving faith. And that faith has been evolving over centuries because of slavery and genocide and lynching and internment camps and travel bans and changing borders. Our evolving faith is not new, but it is different. Our evolving faith has to answer some tough questions about history, some tough questions about the present. Our evolving faith often involves a return to the ancestors. Our evolving faith means reading the Bible from the underside. Our evolving faith means starting with theologians of color, like Dr. Will Gaffney. We're here, we're present, and my desire is to say that I see you and that God sees you. The nation has been divided in two. It's supposed to be the nation of God, but ever since its leaders have become obsessed with power, it has been defined by destruction and devastation, vengeance and assassinations. Leaders are rising and falling, fighting and rallying against one another. It doesn't feel like anyone is in control. The kingdom is in chaos. And now a king has been installed, but he and his family members are a hot mess. Sexual assault, endangering his citizens, purposefully putting lives at risk, a tug-of-war over political power, arrogance, rape, incest, murder, death swirl around the family. But it's King David. He's been chosen by God, right? So better to focus on his successes, not his failures, right? And just when it seems like things might calm down, a famine strikes. The rains have stopped, the land is dry. It's been 3 long years and something has to give. So King David goes before God. Why is this happening? He asks. God responds, because of a broken promise. According to David, a covenant made decades ago was recently broken by the former king, Saul, and now a famine has resulted. So David gets off his knees, goes to the offended party, and asks, how can we make this right? I'll do anything you ask to make restitution. Great, they say. We don't want money or treasures, weapons, anything material. What we want is to execute 7 of Saul's descendants. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, friends. It seems awfully convenient that the answer to ending the famine just happens to be retribution against the family who could be convinced of their own right to the throne. But never mind coincidences, right? Never mind decisions born under the pressure of political power. Never mind travel bans and the criminalization of immigrants. Never mind trans erasure and the black justice fighters who are being placed on extremist lists. Never mind white nationalist rallies and a president willing to call himself a nationalist. Never mind the violence people of color have endured over centuries. There's nothing to see here, folks. Just doing what's necessary for the greater good. This is what it takes to end the famine, people. So David obliges and hands over 7 young men, all descendants of former King Saul. They are impaled and hung on the hill of God. They are innocent. They have done nothing wrong. They simply belong to the wrong family. They are snatched from the streets and from their homes, and they are gone for the good of the nation. Against custom, their bodies remain there for the good of the nation. In an act of terror and intimidation, their bodies are exposed for the good of the nation. Have we not been told the same? Racial injustice for the sake of law, racial injustice for the sake of order, racial injustice for the sake of safety, racial injustice for the sake of your job, racial injustice for the sake of the nation. But I need you to understand that racial injustice is death for people of color. Until this moment in the story, women have been forced to play pawns, moved across the chessboard of the nation at the pleasures of the powerful. But then comes Rizpah. Rizpah is the mother of 2 of the 7 boys. For years, she has been caught between the conniving, unhealthy, retributive politics of nations. But with the death of her boys, she has had enough. It's not uncommon for those in mourning, like Rizpah, to put on sackcloth. Jacob wore sackcloth after being told his son is dead. David wears sackcloth when his friend dies in battle. Job wears sackcloth when his life is devastated. But Rizpah doesn't just wear sackcloth as a sign that she's in mourning. She forms an actual sack. She fills it, she throws it over her back, and begins to climb the hill of God. When she reaches the top, she stretches her sackcloth as wide as she can and builds herself a tent. Rizpah has decided to convert the symbol of her grief into a resource for demanding the dignity of the boys. She will stay there. She will protect all 7 bodies with her own. For her, this is not a passing trend. This is not a phase. She stares at death and determines that it has redefined her life. She is pissed. And her anger is not wrong. Her anger is not negative. Her anger is not destructive. Her anger is not violent. Her anger points to what is wrong and what could be made right. The anger of nonviolent protesters at rallies and on highways, at restaurants and dinner parties, on college campuses and government meetings is not wrong. I declare to you on this day, your anger is not destructive, it is instructive. Its jarring nature, fueled by anger, does not make it violent. Uncomfortable? Sure. But we must not be fooled by the privileged and the powerful who defend actual violence, systemic violence, racial violence, and equate that to a missed meal at a fancy restaurant. Your anger points to what is wrong and what could be made right. Do not apologize for not wearing your sackcloth and being sad in a corner somewhere by yourself. Throw that sackcloth over your shoulder and start climbing the mountain of racial injustice, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people feel. For days, Rizpah determines that she will not let bird or beast feast on the bodies of these boys, but days turn to weeks and weeks to months. Rigor mortis sets in the first day the bodies were hung. The stiffness of their bodies is in stark contrast to the active lives they led only weeks ago. The bodies have decomposed before her eyes. The faces are drawn and discolored. She has kept the beasts away, but can't fight the insects that are making the bodies their home. Bodily fluids leak, pooling into a rancid puddle just feet from where she lays. The stench from all 7 has been overwhelming, but still she stays. Her body is weary. Her emotional state wanes with each day. She misses her boys, but still she stays. The vultures and beasts can smell the bodies too. They swoop and call, they crawl and pounce. They came for an easy meal, only to meet a fierce competitor in Rizpah. She waves sticks and throws stones. She screams and stares them down. She is dirty and she is scared, and she is putting her own life at risk. But still she stays and fights. I imagine Rizpah may have had an abundance of energy when she first climbed that mountain, but now she's tired and lonely, and her body hurts, and her heart hurts, and the kingdom has moved on. I don't know how she did it, but here's what I think. I think she looked at those bodies and remembered their humanity. I think she remembered the way they used to play at her feet. I think she remembered their first words and the first time they learned to clap their hands together. I think she remembered Trayvon's smile and Mike Brown's laugh. I think she remembered how much Jordan liked music and how Sandra had hopes and dreams. I think she remembered their humanity. You see, Rizpah refuses to be taken in by the message of dehumanization. Everyone else looked around at those decomposing bodies and were disgusted. But Rizpah refused to let religious notions of piety become the catalyst for her own inhumanity. While she fights, of course, the people are talking about her. Poor dear, lost both of her sons. At first, they probably pity her, maybe even silently support her, but only under their breath, never with their bodies. But the comments become increasingly vicious. She has lost her mind. She's hysterical. A woman gone mad. Then they start to get a little creative. She's a snowflake, a social justice warrior. She's toxic. She's just trying to divide us all. She's just practicing identity politics. She doesn't really care about all those boys. She's a heretic up there with those decomposing bodies. God can't be pleased with her decision to live there. Y'all just let me know when I get to yours. I've seen her up there, and she has lost all civility. She's the real racist. Just watch how intimidating she is. She isn't a team player. She's always looking at the bad side. Such a cynic. She's an enemy of the nation. She doesn't care about the greater good of everyone, just her people. I mean, don't all lives matter? They talk, and they talk, and they talk. And while they talk, Rizpah fights. So I've decided, call me a snowflake. Call me an SJW. Call me toxic. Call me divisive. Call me the real racist. You can claim that I'm a career identity politics person or a paid protester. By all means, declare that all I do is make white people feel bad or feel guilty or feel shame. Go ahead, talk all you want. Tell me I'm not a real Christian, or that I'm leading others astray, or that my message has nothing to do with the gospel. I've heard it all. Please feel free to add to the chorus of folks who believe that Black lives are not worth fighting for. But while you talk, know that I'm getting on this mountain until the dignity of every Black life is honored. I'm gonna be right here. Rizpah has been fighting on that mountain under the hot sun for months. She sits under the sackcloth to have another cry as she stares at the bones of the boys from her hiding place. She can hear the vultures circling above her head once more, waiting for her to fall asleep or give up. She is undone when all of a sudden she hears wheels turning over grit and dirt. At first, it sounds like only one chariot, but then she can hear that there must be more. The noise of horses grow louder as the cries of the vultures fade in the commotion. Rizpah emerges from her makeshift tent and is shocked to find herself staring at the king's attendants. Because the people were talking, her story moves King David into action. She was speaking truth to power, and finally, power concedes. He cannot bring the boys back, but he can dignify them. He can take them down. He can bury them properly. He can acknowledge that they were loved. He can come alongside Rizpah and by his actions declare that she is not ridiculous, that she was doing what was right all along. He can join her in doing what is right. Dear friends who have been fighting for racial justice for a long time and are wearied only by the ramping up of the need to fight for racial justice, I need you to know that you are a part of Rizpah's legacy. You who experience injustice in your bodies, in your families, in your communities. You are Rizpah, who has potential to move the king. We join Ida B. Wells, who wrote against lynching, and maybe Till Mobley, who placed her murdered child in an open casket. We join Sabrina Fulton, who shared with us the life and death of Trayvon Martin and Leslie McSpaden, who marched up and down the streets of St. Louis to remind us that perfection is not a qualification for avoiding execution in the streets. The legacy has potential to continue in us. So I declare you, Rizpah, who fight for racial justice. I declare you, Rizpah, who fight for the incarcerated. I declare you, Rizpah, who work for the rights and well-being of queer people of color. I call you Rizpah, who refute at every turn the message that the Latino community is to be feared. I call you Rizpah, who fight for indigenous lives. I call you Rizpah, who recognize the suffering in the AAPI community and resist model minority myths. I call you Rizpah, who fight against Islamophobia. I call you Rizpah, for you have the courage to be angry and the love required to pursue justice, to step into lost causes, to speak truth to power. I call you Rizpah. And today, if your evolving faith means standing before tombs and believing in the possibility of life, I want you to know that you are not alone. Amen.